have some bike, not the super expensive one, but at least it's light. But some other people, they really love this kind of one speed without any kind of mechanical constructions whatsoever. That's not the type you have, or what's it called? It's this one, that have a single. You don't have any gears or anything on it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I don't. No, that's not what I have. I have one that has. I don't exactly know how many gears it has. Maybe 18 or something like this. You don't really count that much. You just put it to whatever gear that this feels good, and then you just push. So, it's a good sport. It's you're very close to nature. You can stop anytime you want. We would bike somewhere, stop for a cup of coffee, and then we'd push it again, and then get off somewhere, take a swim maybe, and you're here and you can smell everything around you. And it's really nice.
It is, and I'm not training enough as I should. And I was biking a lot before, but I have stopped the last couple of years, unfortunately. So I really feel ashamed now that I don't do as you do, which sounds awesome, I must say.
Well, you can join us this coming year. We have now biked from Gothenburg to Stockholm and from Gothenburg to Copenhagen. So we have one Scandinavian capital that's reachable within bike to go here in the summer. So that's Gothenburg to Oslo. Yeah.
Oslo. Oh.
That's the shortest.
Right.
That's a 3-day ride, I think. So that's
a lot of mountains in Norway as well.
Oh yeah, if you pass Oslo, you will
thing.
Find a few hills there.
I'll think about that.
Good. I thought you would practice before that.
I should probably. But with that, very welcome here, Mats Nordlund. I'm very honored that you could come here to us as well. I've known you for a number of years, and I must say I've been always very impressed with your skills and knowledge and your experience. And I wish more people could learn from what I have when I have talked to you in the past over so many different things. So I hope more people can learn more today from all the discussions we can have here. And you also are the director of research now, and what's called special project as well. Is it SenseAct or Sanuity, or that they have changed name now? It's SenseAct now, right? Or?
That is correct. Yeah, thanks, Anders, for having me here. Yeah, it is the company name. It started off as a joint venture between Volvo Cars and Autoliv at the time. That later became Veoneer. So at that time, the company was called Sanuity. But then it was split between Veoneer and Volvo Cars because they developed in different strategic direction, and then the part that remained with Volvo Cars is called SenseAct, and that's my affiliation.
Yeah, looking forward to hearing more about that and self-driving cars and everything, which of course is also a passion of mine. So I'm really looking forward to those discussions. But you also are the head of the data factory at AI Sweden, right?
Yes,
and it's also something that I've been active in. So also looking forward to hearing more stories from the times in the early beginnings of AI Sweden. I guess when you were on the trip to Canada, where we went there and trying to get some inspiration, I guess, for how we could start up this institution, if you call it that, in Sweden, and trying to accelerate AI usage in Sweden, which was an awesome trip. I must say, I really love Canada. What do you think about Canada?
Oh, a fantastic place. I've just been on the telecon today with Canada. In fact, with Montreal, where we went.
Yeah.
Had a couple of colleagues from. One colleague from AI Sweden is actually located there. And we have Peter, yeah. Peter Kurtzwälli. Yes. So if you listen to this, Peter, hi. Yeah. And then we had two colleagues from the local ecosystem there, one from Mila and one from a company that's looking at, or not a company exactly, an organization setting up there to start up a new initiative there.
I mean, there are so many interesting things, I think, in Canada. For one, of course, they have a type of society, I guess, that is rather similar to Sweden. And I also like, of course, they are, I would argue at least, you can disagree if you want to, but I would argue that they are one of the biggest pioneers in AI as well, with the mafia of deep learning there with Jan LeCun and Jeff Hinton and Benjo and others that actually all came from Canada. People don't know that, but they actually came from Canada, all of them. And at least Benjo is still in Canada, and he stayed in academia as well, right?
I think Hinton is also back in Toronto now.
Oh, he went back from Google
I think he's at least part-time affiliated with the Vector Institute in Toronto. So, but I don't know exactly how much time on the ground and the specifics, but I've seen him in the startup of the Vector Institute some years ago.
Because otherwise Hinton went to Google, of course, and Jan LeCun went to Facebook or Meta. Do you have any preference in the three of the pioneers there of deep learning?
I'm glad that they all got the Turing Prize together, I guess, at some level. I think that's well deserved, and I think they all contributed very important parts, and it's hard to rank them in any way. I think that, as in many things, you have one thing building on something else, and the interaction there is almost like a Three Musketeers or something along these lines. You need all of them, or a football team. You need somebody scoring and somebody in the middle and somebody defending. So
but if you were to, how should I phrase this? Of course, Google has its brand and its goals and opportunities and perhaps challenges as well. Facebook certainly does. Meta does as well. Academia in general also have its challenges. So if you were to choose one of the paths of the Three Musketeers, which one would you have preferred to have taken?
I like to compete. That's what I love. So I get passion from succeeding whatever it is. And so it's not a money game for me at all. And I think that all of these three satisfy different passions. So obviously if you have more of an interest in building wealth and so forth, then you would go into industry, and especially big tech, that you can generate huge amounts of wealth there. If you want your independent thinking freedom, then academia would be a good place, as long as you can get funded there. Then you have some freedom. If you don't get funded, you still have some issues, right? And then you can be sort of halfway in between. You can be at academia funded by industry. I'm not sure if that's the best or the worst of both worlds, but it's certainly part of both worlds. So I think that you can actually have, if you want to do the best of both worlds, you would have part of your funding on an industry part, and then make sure that when you get funded by industry, have a portion of that you can do as whatever you want.
Right.
Then you have the best of both.
I want to have the proper introduction of your background as well, but since you brought this topic up, I must just go a bit deeper there. It would be fun to just hear your thoughts, since you have a background in academia as well. And you did your PhD. It was a number of years ago.
Yeah, many years ago. It turns out I graduated something like 1996.
Yeah.
So a long time.
But you've also been in industry for a long time. So you've seen both sides, as you just mentioned, and there are, of course, pros and cons of working in academia and in industry. If I phrase it, I'm trying to not phrase a leading question here. But we can easily see that there are challenges in academia. I've been part of it as well, and I saw challenges such as, having to write, funding applications all the time, and perhaps also working with stuff that is not potentially as useful or as, how should you phrase it, as directly impacting the society as perhaps you could if you worked in industry. Or how would you phrase the differences between working with AI or data or engineering in general between academia and in tech industry?
When in industry, you start with a business case. I'm going to do this to make money this way. So that's your starting point.
But is money necessarily the main objective?
In a business, yeah, no doubt, because you need to fund what you're doing through sales at some point. So at some point, you need, whatever you do in industry needs to at some point have a money impact. It could be by selling more, or it could be by reducing your costs, improving through, for example, improved efficiency or some other way. But whenever you go, and I used to run a rather large R&D organization for a big US company. So whenever you started off a project, whatever it was, you always had to have some kind of a business case at the end of the day. Now in academia, any project there should start with a question. And the industry project is done when it delivers the value in one way or the other. Whereas the academic project is more or less done when you've answered a question. Then you can have a follow-up question and so forth. But you aim to answer a question and then publish your new knowledge.
Yes, in academia. But you could do in industry as well.
In some companies, absolutely, you can. Some companies will not allow you to do that. But many companies do allow and encourage publications for sure.
I'm eager to get into engineering versus science, which is one interesting dimension, which is potentially different from academia versus industry. So let's pause, I think, the engineering versus science and just focus a bit more on the academia versus industry. Okay, let me I worked at Spotify and other companies. Of course, they need to have a way to make money, yes. But I would say that the number one thing is really user experience for them. And I think it is for Google and Facebook and many others as well. More so than money, but please disagree if you don't think so. But
and I don't see the contradiction. I think that user experience, if you have bad user experience, they'll go to the competitor. So you will lose.
Exactly.
So so there is a business case. If I was a UX designer and you were my head of R&D and I want to do a new UX, I would have to go to you and sort of argue with you and say, you should allow me time to develop this new cool UX, which will bring in this much more traffic to we direct our customers to this particular feature that you want. But you would always sort of put that in the context of your business somehow. Whereas industry could also be interested in a research question like, I want to find out which user interface is better. So I worked in the aircraft industry sometime many years ago when I was doing my PhD at the time, and we had certainly research going on there too. The pilot human-machine interface for the pilots, what symbols and whatever other types of interactivity in the cockpit is better. So we would have a research question there saying, should we project to our pilots this way or that way?
So it's also a user experience question, actually.
Absolutely, and that's a question there. So it's a research part, and then you could argue with the head of R&D at the company and say, why do I want to know that? Well, we need to know that answer so that we can then develop the right thing for our. So research and engineering or industry and academia, they do go together, so that in industry, you do need the answers from the academia to invest in the right thing. And if there's a gaps in your knowledge, you also need to ask yourself, how do we do this? And then move on.
Okay, I don't think we can leave out engineering versus science. So let's go there as well and then see if we can mix all these kind of 4 different dimensions together with academia, industry, engineering, and science. I would argue that you can do both engineering and science in industry or at academia. But do you have a preferred? I have one definition of engineering versus science. Do you have a preferred definition, or?
Well, science is sort of the quest for knowledge, right? So in whatever field you want to go into, if you do it very broadly, and engineering is essentially figuring out how to make value from nature in one way or another. You package phenomena from nature, chemistry, physics, whatever it might be, and you package in a way that you can create a value, whatever that is. So that's sort of how I think about it. I heard an interesting professor in the US once who said to me, science, there are some fields like mathematics. They don't call themselves science. They say it's mathematics or physics. Then you have a lot of fields like computer science, which have to add the word science. So how come they have to add the word science at the end? Shouldn't that be obvious? Or is that not science if you don't say it's science? Which was an interesting rhetorical question. I
also hear people saying physics versus engineering, as if you can't do engineering in physics. I would argue you can.
No doubt. I agree.
So my simple, I like to have a super crisp and super sometimes oversimplified definitions of things. But for engineering, I would say that you can do actually kind of similar work as you do in science, but it's for a different purpose. So the purpose in engineering is to build something, potentially, hopefully, with some good value, but you build something. That's the purpose of doing the work. Versus in science, the purpose for the work you're doing is to gain knowledge, as we say, to build knowledge. So I think the core, it can be very, very concisely separated, I would say, as the difference in purpose, saying either you build products or you build knowledge. Would you agree with that definition of engineering versus science?
Yeah, it's more or less the same. I think we started with this. One starts with a question and one starts with what I call the business case at the time. It's something useful, whether it's a product or a service or something useful. So I agree with that.
And then the question really becomes, if we go back to the original rabbit hole that we started with, which was the 3 pioneers of deep learning there, Benchio and Hinton and Jan LeCun. And they went to industry, 2 of them, and 1 stayed in academia, and perhaps Hinton has gone back at least partly to academia. I would also argue that in industry, there are pros and certain cons, and there are other things in academia that are also pros and cons. And of course, as you said, in industry, you need to make money, otherwise the company will disappear. I would also argue that in academia, you need to make money as well. Otherwise, you won't have any way to conduct your science that you do are required to do there. It's just the difference of purpose, potentially, for the organization. Would you agree with that? Because you must, I think, since you have moved from academia, I guess you made the journey from academia into industry, right?
And then back.
And then back, all right.
And then to industry. And then sort of into a hybrid. So, and if you look at your three musketeers, if you will,
yes.
I hope that it's not an offensive perception of that, but our great colleagues in Canada, I think all of them have a university affiliation right now. In fact, I reviewed some proposals by LeCun right now, recently here, who is at the New York University, NYU, at least part-time, obviously, not full-time. But I think they all have a foot in the academic side. And I think that's an important thing to do, because one of the things I learned is that if you want to be an effective industry person and have the ability and the chance, the fastest way to move knowledge from academia to industry is not on research papers. It's in the head of a person. So because it's not only the knowledge that you gain, knowledge you can codify, and I can transfer knowledge to you. I can tell you how to do something. But in addition to make knowledge useful, you need know-how.
Yes.
You need to know how to actually build this jig or this thing and how to implement it. That's typically not published in a paper or in a patent. So my experience, and when I way back started up a program at MIT a long time ago, we pitched that. And I can come back to that later if you want or are interested, that having persons moving often back and forth is the fastest way to move new knowledge from academia to industry. And if you do it at a sufficiently, because you could argue that what about students? And there's no doubt students are super important, but if you do this at the mid-manager or senior manager level, they have the power and the experience to implement it really fast. They can put it in the context of the products. They have the credibility to actually put it in place, and that they can actually make it happen. And they can give feedback to the university that whatever you guys are talking about will never work because of these things. And then the university learned from them that, oh, wow, we haven't thought of that constraint or that thing. And then they have to tweak their theories or something. So to have that mobility is really a very strong ability. And I've seen many countries, including here, where you have mobility grants that are available through various funding sources, foundations, government agencies, whatnot, but they are really poorly used. That's, I think, because we haven't figured out from industry how to make the business case to take that person out of production for 3, 4, 5, 6 months to go out and do something and come back.
Sure.
And the universities might not have figured out how to create that value for them. So that's an interface we could improve.
Yes. I haven't even thought about this, so that's why I'm a bit stuck here. It's not many people that get me
stumped, right?
No. So I love that comment. And I know we were thinking about hiring people when I was in industry as well, from academia, and having professors working at some more business use case and vice versa as well. But we were thinking, what would a professor do at our company? He would never be able to do anything of value. But I guess it's wrong. I'm not sure if, tough question. But I think I love what you said. The
tradition here is actually quite different. So I was a lot in the US academic system. And in the Anglo-Saxon system, there is it's common practice that you have sabbaticals. So every 5-6 years, you have 6 to 12 months of sabbatical where you are paid by the university to go and do whatever you want. That could include going to a different university to pick something up that you found interesting. It could be going off on a boat, sail for a year, if you want to clear your head, or which is unusual, I should say. Or it could also be going into industry. And I have colleagues and good friends from my academic time who I've seen going off to really interesting companies. They would go on a sabbatical to companies like the ones we mentioned before, but also to others that are developing specific applications of the science they're working on so that they can see how it gets used. And of course, these companies, they benefit a lot from having this professor there to boost them. And the professor gains a lot of new research ideas and input. So it's really something we should tweak.
It makes perfect sense when you describe it like that.
And one of the most interesting thing I should say also that I should pitch here, which I picked up from another colleague we've had here in Sweden recently, is that the US has now taken the next step that created something called a digital core. And that is a really cool concept that I think many countries should take a look at and learn from. It's here in many companies we have something called graduate programs. That's for students who come out of universities with a master's degree or similar, or a PhD, and then they have a 1 or 2 year program in a company to learn. They rotate from different positions. So the US government has put something like this in place. They call it the Digital Core, which is a cool name. And it's a 2 year program for top graduates from top universities in computer science and similar fields to come in and help the different authorities in the US to get their digitalization right. So it's a 2 year program.
So they help the authorities in US. Oh,
it's super clever.
And who is obliged, or who can apply for that? So who can
US citizens out of US top universities.
From universities to authorities.
Yeah, and they have a program like they have in the company. So they hold them together like a cohort, and then then they can come back for refreshers every so often. And as they get more and more senior, they get more and more useful. I thought that was really clever.
It's an awesome idea, I would say so. Okay, just to at some point get back to your background as well, but just finish off the topic of academia versus industry in some nice way. And let me make a statement and see if you agree or disagree. Feel free to disagree. We could, if we just we want to maximize science now, and we just make the pursuit of knowledge to go as fast and as good as possible in some moral and in a good way, then it could be driven from more basic research in academia, or it can be driven also from more engineering or industrial use cases. I would potentially argue that Tesla and these kind of companies, they are actually driving science as well, but with a very, very strong engineering focus. So it's engineering first driven research almost, if you understand what I mean. And then we have, more academic, basic research first driven science. And I think they can, and at the end, if we take self-driving cars, which is your field of expertise as well, the question is really who can come to the best solution quickest. I think the engineering first potentially could be better. Do you agree?
That's a difficult question. So now you stumped me back, I guess. My experience is that it's two things that enables that. It's personality. Who is this person, and how bold are they? And the other one is the environment. How open is the environment? Encouraging is the environment for that person to explore different things. I saw a study when I was a PhD student way back, and that has really impacted the way I think about it. It was done by, I think, Stanford at the time, sometimes a long time ago, and they asked themselves more or less the same question that you asked. Yeah. How come, I think the question was something like the following, it's not exactly right, but it was something like, it appears that the impact of research done in US universities is higher than the impact of research done in European universities. Why is that? It's almost the same question you asked. And they looked into this, and the conclusion, if I'm not completely off here now, was essentially that European research, and of course these are generalizations and so forth, there are always exceptions, right? So there's a certainly high impact research from Europe as well. But anyway, the conclusion was that in general, European research tradition builds on a body of knowledge. So you start with your body of knowledge, and then you make an increment on that. You make another increment, and you sort of build a solid platform and so forth.
Yes.
Step by step, you get somewhere. There's more. There is that type of research done in the US, of course, as well. But there's also a larger proportion of crazy ideas that they research. Yes. They'll say, what about doing this? And it could start with an engineering problem. Could this even be possible? And it's not starting with any sort of scientific foundation today, but rather than from I'd love to go to the moon, for example, or whatever. And then what do we need to go there?
To think backwards in some way.
Yeah, and see if you can actually put that in place. Yeah. And then once you've somehow magically made that work somehow, then somebody else, maybe the Europeans, can then explain how that happened, right? So bring it back to science again. So, and that's more of an engineering approach. As an engineer in industry, you don't always need to explain why everything works. As long as it does it, it's fine. You don't need to prove everything.
Yes.
Not all the time anyway. and so I think that one can think about it that way, how, and that's why I said it's kind of the individual, because you can have scientists who come up with crazy ideas too in science, and not just sort of take this. There's a lot of for example, to take a really obvious example, science for a long time said that the Earth is the center of the universe, right?
Yes.
So all the scientists agree with that. And if you said something different, you might even end up in trouble.
Yes.
And then some crazy scientist said, well, that can't be right.
Yeah.
And he ended up in prison for Galileo or some other, maybe compared. Anyway, so they ended up in all sort of trouble, right? Yeah. So sometimes scientists challenge the status quo as well and make a huge impact from that.
Yes.
So I think it's personality driven, and it's also the environment. So at the time when the Earth was considered to be center of the universe, the environment wasn't very open to the idea that it wasn't. And I think that's so the right person, the right environment. That's where you see the impact.
Right person, right environment. Awesome.
Sometimes they're scientists, sometimes engineers. That was diplomatic, right?
Yes. So in short, if we try to summarize here, we can say that there are pros and cons with having work, if it's engineering or science, being done in industry or academia. Both have their potential advantages. Perhaps different ways to approach. I mean, you spoke about more incremental kind of science that you can do in academia, and then potentially more first principle thinking kind of Elon Musk, Tesla, engineering first driven science that leads to new ways to build a battery or whatnot. And I guess if the best solution is to have both, it's a very diplomatic answer, but it would be dangerous perhaps to remove both and any of these kind of approaches, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You do need both, and they're complementary. And I think we've seen in Europe and in the US and now in other parts of the world as well, how that is evolving in different ways. And the only pattern I see is the right person who has that, but you also need people who do sort of step by step, incremental. Yes. That's absolutely not necessary to have a solid ground to stand on. Yeah. You need that. And then you need some of the crazy guys. You can't have too many crazy guys because then the whole thing will fall apart, I think.
Yes. So just, I want to finish this topic, but okay, so thinking of the crazy stuff that you said, I just want to have a final quote about that. Crazy is one thing, but having the idea of first principle thinking, I'm not sure if you heard about, Elon Musk's way of thinking. He calls it, the way he thinks is first principle thinking. So that means it's very dangerous to do things the way it's been done in the past. Or if you reason by analogy only, you will get stuck in the old way of doing things and will never really come up with the more innovative solutions. So for him, at least, he says that this type of first principle thinking is the reason he has been so successful as he has. But I guess he is still doing a lot of incremental thinking anyway, while claiming to do first principle thinking. Or how do you reason about that?
Oh, absolutely. I completely. My thesis advisor, a fantastic professor, he always told us more or less the same. He used the term solution neutral environment. We should only talk in a solution-neutral environment.
Solution-neutral environment.
And he said engineers are notoriously bad at using the solution-neutral environment. So engineers are really good at talking in concrete terms. We should have this wheel here. We should have this capacitor there or something. But he said that then you will get stuck exactly like you said in the old way of thinking.
Yes.
He said another area which is really good at this is politicians. They never argue about what they want to achieve. They argue about we should raise the tax, we should lower the tax, or we should put more money here or more money there, but they don't talk about the solution neutral environment as to what do you want to achieve. And that I think is exactly the same as Elon Musk is pointing out. It's like, what do you want to achieve? What's that way of thinking? Yeah. And then you can argue, okay, I want to do this. Then you can argue about the different solutions and we can compare your idea to my idea and we can have a third party then, or we can develop some principles to evaluate ideas and see which one perhaps is better. So I think that sort of summarizes it. The people who will really have the impact is the ones who have the ability to step back, take a solution-neutral view, and see if there's another way.
And speaking about right people and people that I think have the overview or have the full picture, so to speak, of something, I think that is the people that can actually come up with a more innovative solutions, and I think actually you are one of those. But how did that happen? Can you go a bit more into your background? Who is Mats Nordlund? How would you describe yourself?
Who I describe? So who I am? I'm I grew up on the islands outside Stockholm here, not too far away from where we are right now, and was really interested in rocks when I was little, because on my island
rocks, not in like music,
no, but
in rocks.
Stones, as in stones,
yes,
yeah.
okay.
Because I grew up on this island, and when I was, I don't know, around 9 or so, my parents gave me a book about minerals and rocks, and I read in that book, and then I thought it was really cool because I had a chapter on radioactive rocks, and I didn't know what that was, and there was some debate on radioactive stuff. So I thought, wow, they got some radioactive stones even. That would be cool, I thought, when I was 9 or 10. So, and then it said, when I was reading about these minerals, that they discovered right on this island where I grew up. So they have this old mine out there that became really famous in chemistry and physics area, because 4 elements in the periodic system is named after this particular little island.
Really?
And the place is called Ytterby, and the elements are called yttrium, ytterbium, and then terbium and erbium. They're all from that place. Plus they discovered 3 more elements there that they ran out of names from the island. So the next one was, the next close place was Stockholm's is holmium, and then the next big was Scandinavia's was scandium, and then they had another one after it. So there's a whole bunch of elements from this one particular little island. So I thought that's really cool. And so I really started to investigate these rocks, and I had a really fantastic neighbor who was working at the cancer hospital here in Stockholm, who took my stones in there to see how radioactive they were. And she came home again and said, well, these rocks are pretty good, she said. And it was
good in a bad sense, or
they were not dangerous, but they were certainly noticeable, if you put it that way. So I think if you travel with them in your hand luggage today through, immigration, they're going to ask you a few questions, is my guess. So I then started to go in there and do research on these rocks when I was, I think, a 6th grader to the university here in Stockholm to learn more about them, because I was really quite curious. And that sort of sparked my interest in science and exploring and just asking interesting questions and learning. That was really good fun. So that's kind of how I came up in that direction. And then I developed an interest in many different directions to learn everything that seems unusual to me. Sparks an interest. And then I also realized that I like to compete. So I have this passion to compete on whatever I do. It's good fun, not to compete on an individualistic basis, but to the people I work with and so forth. How good can we become at whatever it is we do?
Right. So as a team, more or less, to compete,
and building something with colleagues and putting together, it's like a soccer team or something. Some people like to compete individually, like people who do figures, I guess they can do in pairs, but individual gymnastics, for example, or runners or something like that. Whereas for me, it's more of a building a team, putting this together, trying to make it work, and see how far you can go with it. These are the things. So curiosity and passion for competition. Then I did my engineering, started at KTH and in electrical engineering.
And this was beginning.
I started at 87. Yeah. And then when I got out, there was a recession, pretty bad recession. So there was hardly any engineering jobs. So most of the people who graduated at the same time as me, they ended up as taxi drivers or prison guards. So Sweden had the highest level of education of anyone in the world of their prison guards and taxi drivers. So I had a good friend there too, who told me she was at the prison guard at the prison for financial crime. And she said, I learned all the stuff about how to do finance there, because all the guys who were locked up there, they were telling her that, well, if I had only not done this thing, I would have made it.
Right.
So she said she learned all the tricks of the trade.
So interesting. But you didn't end up in prison.
No,
right?
I didn't. No, neither side. So I ended up, I was one of the few lucky guys who ended up in a PhD program. So I started off at KTH and then pretty quickly moved over to MIT and had my advisor there, and then was the first industrial PhD student in Sweden. So,
oh, really? Yeah. The first one ever?
Yeah. And it was Saab in Linköping who sponsored me. And so it never existed before. And I had a really, really visionary CTO of Saab at the time, Saab military aircraft, who decided that, but let's try this model. We never tried it before. Normally we just hire the PhDs when they're done, but let's try this and see how it works, if we can have you as a bridge between academia and industry. Right. And having me at MIT really helped out so that I could pick up stuff. And that's when I learned that the fastest way to transfer knowledge from academia to industry is in the head of a person. So I could move between. And that model then, he liked so much that he said, why don't you put together a proposal to a foundation in Sweden to set up an industrial PhD program? And we did that, and it got funded. So from there on, the industrial PhD program has started up.
Interesting. And you were a student then at KTH, or was it MIT, or was it a collaboration?
Between the two, yeah. So I came out of electrical engineering at KTH. I went off to MIT mechanical engineering, and I was working in system architecture. And at the end of the day, to make the two systems compatible and to bring home the knowledge, I ended up doing my thesis defense here at KTH with essentially a committee from MIT plus one or two industry guys from here. So it was a very good example of academic collaboration and learning from each other's systems.
What was the title of your thesis? Do you remember?
The exact title, it was basically essentially in innovation and system architecture. So the actual title I have was 30 years ago since I wrote that. But it was on axiomatic design was the principle for it. It was by
once again,
axiomatic design was the one fundamental theory. The other theory was called the theory of inventive problem solving, which came out of Russia at the time. And we sort of found it out by luck because some guy came from Russia to MIT. This was in 1993, just after the Soviet Union fell apart. And we were able to learn it quickly there, and we saw the potential. And then I brought it back to Sweden to start implementing some of that here. So we combined the work that we did at MIT with the stuff that came out of Soviet Union and put that together. And then
mobility again, moving people from different parts of the world and society, I guess.
Then when I finished, I was given the possibility to start up a whole new academic program at MIT. So this was in 96. I was given the chance to start up a whole new program called the System Design and Management Program, SDM, which is still there. So if you go on to sdm.mit.edu, that's a fantastic program. You should all go there, right?
Saying without any biases.
Without any bias, yeah. And it's still there, and it's still thriving and has had a lot of impact. Changed a lot. It was the first time ever MIT did distance learning. So I can tell a lot of stories about that.
What year was this approximately?
1996.
So could you do like remote education at that time?
Yeah.
In what way?
We had two ways. We had VHS cassettes and we had ISDN, 2-channel ISDN telephone, which we connected into a bridge, which we rented from AT&T. And then they would dial in there. And we would have essentially a web. At that time, it wasn't called a webcam because there was really not much of a web to talk about. It was even slower because you would have these telephone modems on the web. So we went, but it was sort of and then we had a document camera. So we didn't have things like PowerPoint and stuff. So we would still have overhead pictures, and then you had a camera over it and then take pictures of that.
Cool.
And so it was all sort of, so we solved all the problems. So that essentially put all the groundwork in place for what's now edX and so forth, these big MOOC programs. And it was really we learned a lot from that. And we had only people from industry in the program who had about 10 years experience. And our main pitch to why should you go there, and this comes back to this whole thing about transferring knowledge again, was that now you're a mid-level manager, you're high potential in your company, you've identified to come here. So this is the fastest way to take knowledge from MIT back into your company. And that's why you should pay, and that's why you should come. And what typically happened was that they would sit there at their conference room in the company, take a course, then they could go right away to the engineering group and implement it or test it if it was relevant. And that happened many times. We actually had a whole score sheet of things that had been implemented this way.
It seems once again, I mean, the interaction between science and engineering, it has a lot of positive side effects on both sides, so to speak.
Absolutely,
It can drive what science to do, but can also make the engineering course works much better if you have the proper science behind it. So
and it was really helpful for the professors too. It was really interesting to see the dynamics. I was a pretty young, scientist, just finishing at the time, but some professors loved it. They got questions from industry that they had never thought of and that they never would have come across otherwise. Other professors, they hated to get questioned. They were used to young, polite students who just sort of nod their heads and say, yes, professor. Whereas these industry guys would come back at the professor and say, well, this can't be right. And they weren't quite used to getting challenged that way. So we had some interesting dynamics. But over time, people got used to it, and these students became very attractive to have in your class.
I remember a lot of discussions, speaking to math professors that were dear friends of mine at the time. But they hated the idea of applying any kind of science and thought that it was a very ugly type of science, if we call it that. But do you think so as well? Do you think applying science is not as pure as basic research in some way?
Oh, I think that's a mistake to say it that way. I think that applying science generates all sorts of new, interesting research questions.
That's right.
So, I mean, that's a good seed to create new science, complementary science. And, if you can apply the science straight away and you don't have to think more about it, well, great. Then you've done a fantastic job in the first place. Very few science results are ready. There are always stuff that, we didn't think of this, or actually, here's the limit or whatever. So it's to just generate science that cannot, they can be interesting too. And it certainly, I was setting up a big academic program in other country, and there was this debate, and we said, right, we have to be able to motivate it for taxpayer money, that there's some benefit, not only for the scientists to think this is cool, but there's got to be something else for the society. Well. So what we said then was that they were researching perhaps, let's say, black holes or something. It's hard to really pinpoint the benefit for society to understand a black hole. It's not obviously sometime close, but what we said was that the instruments that we create, the technology, the signal processing, the analysis tools, and so forth, that technology we can take and transfer to other application areas. And that's the benefit for society, because the black hole have so high demands on the sensors and the different tools that they need, and the mathematics, the modeling, and everything else, that once you've sort of figured that out, then you can take that, apply it to healthcare or to something else. So that's kind of
like side effects of the other research you're doing that have some kind of value directed to society in some way. Yeah.
So I mean, CERN is another example of that. Yeah. From a societal point of view, who cares if you find another meson somewhere, right? And we're going to do fine without it, right? They did it for a long time, but the instruments and the knowledge created to find that particle that we can use.
You mean like the Higgs boson or something? Yeah. And the Large Hadron Collider in CERN, which is an awesome feat of engineering, I would say.
Absolutely. It's super cool.
But you do a lot of awesome research with, or science on. Okay, cool. So what happened after that? So you had your academic career as well. You did your PhD, and what happened after that?
So then after we've been there for 2 years, then we moved back to Sweden to start up a family, and I went back to Saab and had a really good industry career there for, what would it be, 12? But overall, it was actually 2 years at Saab then. And then I joined a subsidiary of Saab who was doing, it was invented around 1970 or so. They took a sensor from a missile and as a radar. And we used that to measure the distance to a level in a tank.
Okay.
So how what level is the liquid in this tank? And it had the big breakthrough was on ships, marine ships. So that it was a contactless way of measuring tank levels. It sounds like, how hard can that be? And it turns out it's a super difficult problem, because once you put microwaves into a tank, they bounce all over the place. And if you need a precision of 1 millimeter up to a measuring distance of 70 meters on a very low dielectric constant fluid close to a tank bottom of metal, it's all of a sudden not that easy. Right, so there was some really sophisticated stuff that was going on there. And then Saab sold that to Emerson Electric.
Yeah.
Which is a big US company similar to GE or Siemens.
Right.
And we became part of Emerson Process Management, and I was head of R&D for that. And then we ended up having, within Emerson, there was a couple of different divisions, and we had the one that was called Level and Marine. So I headed the R&D for Emerson Level and Marine, and we had a number of different research and development centers here in Europe. So we had in UK, Denmark, Sweden, Russia, Germany.
So you had at least some form of a research team done at that.
We had about 300 people altogether. So about 70 in Sweden, and then in UK and Germany and Russia and so forth. So
Was that, what type of research would you say that was? Was it more traditional academic research, or was it more industrial?
It was engineering. How do you get the microwaves, and how do you how do you? It was sort of measurement. How do you measure with it? It wasn't only microwave. We added other technology as well. But how to, on super low power, measure very accurately across a temperature span from very cold temperature like up in Canada, Siberia, to very hot temperatures in the deserts.
Oh, exciting.
And so it was like, how do you make the electronics? How do you make the detection? And we play with different frequencies, and what kind of materials should you use what frequency for? And there was a whole bunch of stuff. We were really at the far end of how to use this technology for measuring.
But was the main goal to build products, or was it also to do publications at that time? Or?
No, we weren't publishing much, other than just the trade journals and just saying how good we were.
Yes.
But not we didn't really want to tell people how to do this stuff. The only publication that told you how, and it turns out that's true for most areas, is patents. So we wrote a lot of patents, and it turns out that I got some statistics. 70% of all technical literature is published only as patents.
How much is it?
70%.
70%.
So only 30% is published in journals and stuff. Yeah.
If we just take that question a bit more in depth, the question of the positive benefits of patents can be discussed in various ways, and especially if you go to software patents as well. And then you can think about other, areas such as medical research, which perhaps would be impossible to do without having patents. So there you can see, pros and cons with both. What is your thought about patents in general? Are they a good thing for society?
So the quick question would be yes, and then you have the but. Yes, but is the quick answer on that. So there is absolutely a need for patents to motivate many investments that are done. And also, if you look at strategy and so forth, it's one way to. If you have big companies who've been in the field for a long time, you can take telecom or automotive or medicine or whatever. They've all paid quite a lot of money to get into the field they're in. And they sort of make a barrier or a sort of a fence saying that, okay, I've invested this much money, so therefore I have all these patents. That's kind of my entrance fee. If somebody else wants to come in here, well, they have to pay this much to join, to help me. Otherwise, I've just done all the investment, and then you just free ride your way in there.
Exactly.
And then companies who've done similar level of investments, they don't have to pay each other. So if we are two telecom companies or two automotive companies or something, we can then just decide to exchange patents to some level and say that, okay, well, you've done all this work, I've done all this work. Okay, fine. So you're part of the people who've invested. So fine, we'll just trade. So I think it's important to have that mechanism.
So it could be dangerous for society if we didn't have patents, at least in some areas.
Yeah, I think so, no doubt. But then I think patents are misused, and there are many examples of that. So you have that but is rather big, and you have there are some really bad examples of patent trolls where they don't do anything; they just sort of get hold of patents, then they go sue everybody, and that is a bad way to do it. I think that
it happened a lot in the time at Spotify, etc. I can tell you.
So patent trolls are no doubt problematic. That's not the intentions of patents when they were created. That was not the idea of why. So I think to some level one should perhaps review the system. But the general idea almost goes back to, I think, tradespeople. Like they would, I would teach you as a master builder or something, and then you're my apprentice. I would teach you how to build. But then you can't compete with me, because then all I'm doing is just creating a competitor. And I think that was the reason why patents had originally, anyway, a validity of 17 years.
Okay.
Because it seemed arbitrary. I think here too at some point. So, but I think they've expanded to 20 now. But I think the original time, I might be mistaken on this. So at least it's a good story, right?
Yes.
But the story I have it is that it was originally 17 years, and that's because that was the time it took to become a master by yourself. So that if I teach you, because you get a patent only if I teach you how I did it. So if I teach you how to do it, I get to be alone with it for 17 years, which is essentially the time it takes for you to make your own investment, right? So I think that was sort of some of the history behind why it's.
But if we go, I can certainly agree with what you were saying, especially if we look at like medical or telecom kind of patents that we have, and of course we have Ericsson and others that are very prominent and wouldn't probably exist without having that type of system in place. But then if we take more software or even mathematics or algorithmic type of patents, do you think software should be possible to patent?
I think it's not possible to patent in Europe anyway. They had a possibility to patent it in the US for some period, and I've not completely up to date on it for the last 5-10 years. I haven't been too active working with the patent side. I used to work quite a bit with it in Emerson Electric. So I'm not completely updated on the latest and the greatest.
But do you think it's a good or bad thing potentially? If
software?
If you could, software patents.
No, I don't think that's. I don't see that that's something that you should. There's not much of an invention, software in itself. so you have to have some kind of an invention, an inventive step in there that you can describe. So to just write some code, you can protect that with copyright or something. So I think the European patent is reasonable when it comes to software, where it's the hardware with implemented software that's sort of the invention, rather than the actual software itself. And they even had some period of time when there was some business method patents, like the double-click patents, stuff like that, which is like, come on, guys. Yeah.
Or the one-click buy thing in Amazon,
stuff like that.
But then if we connect or contrast that with perhaps the open source movement of then companies thinking, okay, I'll just put this invention, perhaps years of work that they put into Spark or TensorFlow or whatnot, and then suddenly make it available for everyone to use and also contribute to, and they find a bigger value by doing so than patents. What do you think about that then? Is that a better way to handle software? For some, absolutely, and for some, they want to keep it completely secret. So it's good that they have several different paths forward. So, and the open source I've seen, it comes with different licenses, and I think if you use open source data or open source software, you have to be quite careful with reading these license agreements. Otherwise, you can be. We came across some data set from big Chinese companies not that many years ago, in the last 5 years. They posted a big data set, which was really good, super good. And it was very exciting to a lot of researchers. And I was, wow, this data set is really unique, fantastic, and whatnot. So a lot of people started work on it, including some people in the industry. It was open sourced. And then somebody started to read, what are the license conditions here? And the license conditions were essentially that anything you do with this data, we own. So all of a sudden, this company had essentially got half the world's academics and others work for them for free. Yeah. So, if it's absolutely fine. And from their point of view, that was a brilliant move, right? So from a company point of view, you get all these free workers. Now, the backside of that is that if you want to use open source stuff, absolutely go ahead and do it, but be sure that you understand the conditions before. Yeah, I mean, I think you can almost see that as another type of patent almost, the licenses that you do put on these, if it's data or if it's code or if it's software or whatnot, or AI models. Well, speaking about that, there is a big lawsuit going on right now against Microsoft for their work with Copilot. I'm sure if you've seen
I'm not familiar with that one.
Copilot was this AI model that could generate code. So they basically trained the whole model on all of github.com, which contained a lot of licensed code, of course, and a lot of software that was not really theirs to train a model on. And then anyone can take that model and start to generate code that is inspired in some way. It doesn't really cut and paste from the original code, but it's inspired by it. You could compare it. I guess this is a whole question of AI versus humans in general. And a human can go in and read all the code of GitHub, or they can't, but in theory they can, but in practice it's impossible. But it is in practice possible for an AI tool to actually go through all of GitHub and learn and get inspired from that. And then, if they are now convicted of this, Microsoft, that could have rather big ramifications for all of AI models going forward. What do you think about this? Is it okay for a big AI model in general, if it's learning from text or images or code, to then generate that, given this huge amount of data it's been trained on? Or
I think we have to debate that in society. It's really an interesting question, and this we can spend the rest of today on this one, and general philosophical question, because it's not. I mean, when now that described it from, yes, I have read about it briefly, so I was somewhat familiar with it, but it's analogous to other generative models. That you have the ones that are writing music, you have the ones that there was a big case some years ago when this painting was sold for, was it 450,000 euros or whatever it was in
the NFT thing? Or?
No, it was a painting that was done by an algorithm that I think it was sold in London or Paris somewhere, and it was sold for 450,000. It's done by an AI that was trained on all these masterpieces of art. Right. And inspired by that, and then it generated its own original piece of art, and it was sold at Christie's, I think it was. And then the question was like, who should benefit from this? Who is the inventor or the creator or the copyright holder? Is it the people who it was trained on, or is it the person who wrote the algorithm, or is it the actual computer? Who created this piece of art? Yeah. And I think that you can. And I don't have the answer, yes or no, or here's how you do it. But are the ways you have to think about it. It applies to many fields. Coding is one, and then you see arts, you see music, you see probably also poetry, writing, even translations. So then if you look at artists, a lot of them go around and look at art museums to get inspired. So that's to some level similar.
And any musician, that writes some piece of song, I mean, of course, it's inspired by so many other artists.
Yeah. So and there are some rules as a musician or music writer, composer. How much can you borrow, if you will, from somebody else before it's plagiarism? Yeah. So the question is, how much can you borrow here before it's plagiarism? And I think that this is a lot of new territory for the legal society to think about and for our politicians to think about. So I guess the politicians have to get back into what we discussed before, the solution neutral environment, and start thinking about how to crack this nut.
Yeah, true. I still wonder, we get stuck in this. I add this as a topic later. We can perhaps go back to regulation and how we can work with that in a future society where we have data and AI, being used in various ways. But interesting. Okay, so you worked in Emerson, and you also were part of creating a lot of patents there, and had an R&D team and doing a lot of work. What happened after that?
So when I left MIT back in 1997, I guess, because we were starting up family and having kids, and I thought it was better to do that in Sweden than in the US, which I think was still right. Yes. So they told me then at MIT that, well, you should stay on. Your program is fantastic; it's going well, and you're doing everything right. So why don't you stay? And I said, well, because family. But I said, why don't you call me in 15 years and the kids are bigger? So in 2011, they called me up and says, well, now it's 15 years. So
really,
yes, they did. And a former colleague of mine, professor, had got, and MIT had won this big competition in Russia, where Russia at that time was a good country. It's obviously changed, unfortunately, since then. But at that time, it was a good country, and there was a lot of stuff going on there,
and a lot of great research as well, right?
Yeah. Well, it actually no, and that was the problem. Yeah, not that much at that time, not according to what it should be possible. So one of the problems, we can come back to it, but what had happened in Russia was that they had lost a lot of their productive researchers. So there was not enough. A lot of the people who are between 35 and 55 years old, which is sort of the research leaders, the most productive time, they'd left Russia and gone to Germany and Canada and Israel and other countries. So they had a big gap. And the question was how can one restart the research system? How can we improve innovation? How can we improve education, higher education there? So they had gone out. Medvedev was the president at the time, and this was sort of his flagship project to do what he called the Federal Economic Modernization Program, just to keep it simple, right? And there was a competition for an international partner, and the finalists were Stanford and MIT. MIT won it. And then so that included then setting up a new research university that with the aim to be a top world university within, I think, 20 years or
was that in Moscow then? Or
yeah, Moscow, yeah. Just on west of Moscow. And this was called the Skolkovo project. They put a foundation up and they took money from the oil and gas fund. was very well funded, and it set that all up and pretty much do the right thing and put it at, if you get to start something for free and have a lot of money, what would you do? And MIT got that question, and then they hired not a lot of people, they hired a couple of key people to go over to Moscow and work on the ground there. And we were 2 Swedish people that were recruited into that. We had a couple of American guys, we had some German guys and a few others who came in later. And so I got the task to set up the whole research system for that.
That's a big thing.
It was good fun. Yeah, I learned a lot of stuff, and it developed really well. MIT was fantastic to help us out. This was an MIT project, and with my background at MIT, I knew all the people that I needed to, and I knew how to work at the university, so I could get a lot of traction with that. And one of the things we asked them was, since I was supposed to set up this whole research system there, the question we asked was, how would you set up a high impact research, we call it center or department. We didn't want to call it, we wanted to be solution neutral. So if we say department, it becomes the old stuff.
So,
right?
So it wasn't a traditional university.
No.
More, okay.
How would you do it? If you start at 21st century university, what would you do? Because what we did, we looked back at the traditional university. It was kind of interesting. We looked at MIT and said, all right, if you look at mechanical engineering department, what are the institutions in there, or the institutes in there, or the labs departments? Well, it turns out that you have everything in there you need to build a steam engine. Because that's when they were created. And if you looked at the Aeroastro department, you have everything in there that you need to build a Second World War fighter, plus jet engines that has been added. But the question was like, if you aren't working with steam engines and propeller fighters anymore, now what would you do? And that's the challenge we had, which was really quite interesting. And we put, since I had the funding and the whole task for this, I put the question to the colleagues at MIT, and we had 70 professors working this, and asked them, if you were to set up a high impact center for research, education, and innovation today, what would you do? And then they worked on that for 6 months.
Okay.
And we got the blueprints back for that.
Yeah.
And then our task was then to run international competitions. And we had ability to fund international partners with the $4 million per year to help set up that department in collaboration with a local Russian university. And I was able to set up about 5 of these before I left there in at the end. I left when I had a 3-year contract, or just over 3 years. And during that time, they changed president in Russia again, and the new president, or the old new president, Putin, decided to go into Crimea and go off and I didn't think that was a good direction. So I thought at the end of my first contract, I'm not going to stay on and take a second one. So I left. But by the time I left, we had 5 up and going, and so I learned a lot.
5
centers in different areas. So it was in biomedical. It was in actually in AI. We called it computing intensive science and engineering. We didn't want to call it big data or AI. We want to have more of a solution neutral name for it. And we had in materials manufacturing, photonics. We had in space, and.
So what did these centers consist of? I guess you hired like researchers from different places of the world.
Yep.
And then they had funding for conducting a number of research projects there.
Yep.
And you had competitions.
We would put a competition in place. What we did was we had MIT do a foresight for us in the areas. So we had like, where is science and engineering going? So we got some really good directions there, and then we worked with the guys in Moscow to prioritize that from what do we think is most useful here.
All right. Okay.
And then we had international competitions, and as I said, you could win a lot of money. So we got some really good applicants. You could win to your research group. You could win $4 million per year, which makes people pay attention, right? Yeah. So we had Nobel Prize winners. We had, I think, in one of the competitions, we had 13 different Nobel Prize winners. We had something like a total 350 applicants. And the deal was that they had to pair up with a Russian university to have a knowledge transfer. And the task for the Russian university and this international university was to help us build the department in our new universities. They had to help us set up the research. They had to host students for us during the first year so that we could get students going right away. And then the students would come back after a year once we've got our stuff up and running. So we didn't have to have delays. It was all about speed race. How do we get this done? And so they had to host them. They had to help us recruit. They had to all sorts of things. It was really quite useful and very interesting to be part of these kind of negotiations.
I can imagine.
To set it all up. So
a smart way to quickly get a new set of centers, I guess, started.
And the university was developed extremely well up until the whole invasion and the whole Ukraine problem. And now it's on the sanction like everything else. So now the whole project is obviously failing at this point. But that's for other reasons. But it was going in a really good direction. So the model and the way we learned how to do it is something that I've then brought back here.
Yeah. What happened then?
So I came back, joined as anybody in Gothenburg. Sooner or later you end up in automotive. So I got this chance to work there and got a question from some of the colleagues in automotive saying, can you use what you've learned and do something here to boost our AI ecosystem? Because we felt, or the industry felt, that it wasn't keeping up with what was going on in Germany and the US at the time. So this was in 2017. And so if you look at any indicator back then, which we did, we got good help from KTH library to do a bibliomedic study to see how is Sweden doing in terms of research publications, patents, startups and everything else. And we were underperforming on everything compared to countries we normally either beat or
I'm eager to ask a question now about Sweden, but I'm going to wait with that. But I think you actually have one of the most interesting ways to describe how the Swedish system works. But let's wait with that. And please continue.
So we could see that the data supported the concern they had, and we said, what do we do? And then through some lack of timing and the interest in industry and also in the government at the time that we need to do something. The question is what? And then I had these blueprints and we set this up. So we said, here's what I have.
We take the learnings from.
So we do it. Can we do this?
Yeah.
And at that point, they said, go ahead and run this project and we'll see where it lands. And at the end of the day, 5 years later, we ended up with what we have today in this particular project ended up with what's now AI Sweden. And of course, in parallel with that, a lot of other good things happened here. So it wasn't the only good thing that happened at the time. So there were several different initiatives that were trying to respond to the situation where our system wasn't really up to what you saw in other countries. And I think that in the way it's evolved now over many years, 3, 4, 5 years, it's actually ended up where the different pieces of the puzzles are now starting to fall in their places and they're starting to leverage each other.
And before going into that and seeing, where AI Sweden is today, perhaps when you started this work, how would you describe Sweden compared to perhaps other European countries or US, China or Russia in terms of what you said, in terms of number of publications or startups or economic wealth or however you like to define it?
Oh, you can define it in many different ways. I always entertain myself by, at the time, I can give you a couple of perspectives. One is that at the time, the data we got from KTH library was without a doubt showing that the Swedish AI ecosystem had not kicked off in 2016.
Yeah.
That was the data we had. So we did this study in November 2017 and we took the full year data of 16.
I think you did. Was you behind that visualization where you could see Sweden's number of publications in this kind of graph thing?
Yeah.
Yes, I love that.
And what you could see in other countries was that they had started exponential growth in terms of publications. And it was the same if you look at the number of patents, if you look at the number of startups, and it doesn't matter. All these indicators were like starting to be exponential growth in all the other countries we looked at, except Sweden and Denmark, where it was flat. So the concern we had was like, how do we fix this? We can't just do the same as they do. Because if we do the same, we'll have the same slope on our curve.
Yeah,
it's just that we will always be behind. So the big question we have was like, how do we run faster? And coming back to what I said before, I love to compete. So how do I set up this team?
Team of Sweden, yes.
Yeah, how do I set up Team Sweden here to work this? And who wants to play this game? And who do you want there? So that's sort of the starting point. So at the time, and the question was like, you can always ask yourself, why is that? And of course, depending on who you ask, you will get different answers. But there's we had sometimes the incumbent, and it's the same in industry. If you look at the automotive industry, how come Tesla succeeds? Because they weren't in automotive. How come that the Teslas didn't come out of Volvo or Ford or Volkswagen or something, but they came up somewhere else? And it could be that the incumbent automotive industry were doing quite well. They were doing good profits, and they were doing
too well, perhaps. Then
perhaps, yeah. And then it could be that academics. I'm not saying this is how it is, but it could be that there was no real need to move fields. We had really good academics, really good research. They were well funded, and here was this other area, and should we move there? Well, why? I have good situation here. So my advisor, a PhD student, he told me this from the US at the time. This was in 1988 or something. He got in to run parts of NSF, and he said at that time NSF funded project, or NSF,
that's a National Science Foundation, right, in US, right?
Yeah. So the National Science Foundation, they allocated their research budget based on the number of applications per areas.
Okay.
So areas where you had a lot of researchers had lots of applications, and therefore they got a large percentage of the NSF budget.
Yeah.
New areas where there were almost no researchers, they got zero. So he was really concerned that all this new emerging technology will never or science will never get funded because there's nobody there, and we will just keep doing what we're already doing. So the question was, how do we change that? Yeah. So I'm wondering if we had somewhat of the similar, that these new areas were having a hard time to be visual in our system. But I don't know if that's true or not. But there was a question I asked myself anyway. But anyway, it was what it was, and then.
Yeah, so we were behind at that time in Sweden, and I mean a lot of things were happening in Europe as well, if I recall correctly. I mean in 2018, so many different things happened, and the EU Commission, had published their AI report saying they're going to invest like billions of euros in accelerating AI, and France came out with a similar report also in April 2018, saying they're going to invest $1 billion, and Germany did as well, and UK with their sector deal in AI, and so many different countries were coming out in 2018 saying, they really want to be the best leading country in AI. But it didn't happen so much from Sweden, or do you think that was a mistake from us at that point in time?
To what?
To have a more government-driven effort in accelerating AI.
If you're thinking of AI Sweden, it was sort of
before that.
Before that, I don't know. I was in Russia at that time, so I'm not exactly sure what was going on here. But so I'm not. I talked to the minister at the time, and who was actually a very good guy, and he said that he clearly picked up the signal that we need to do something. Yeah. Everybody was knocking at his door saying, "Do something, do something, do something," and he said, "I'm happy to do something, but what?" Yeah. So he said that everybody. But
if we are being more concrete, and this is before AI Sweden, but so just think. I think Finland came out in 2017, even before this, having a national strategy of AI, meaning more. I mean, Sweden came out, I think it was called like guidelines of AI, but it was no budget behind it. It was more like, this is our
intention.
Yes, but no real budget, so no real strategy, I would argue.
Yeah.
But Finland and other countries in Europe did. Would you agree with this for one?
Yeah, it seems. I mean, that's how it was, right?
Yeah. Okay, but then something happened, and you, I guess you are one of the pioneers behind AI Sweden here, and how they got started, and spoke to the government and people there about this, and you got them to understand that we need to do something. The question is just what then, right?
Oh, no, it was the opposite. A lot of people had already convinced the government that we need to do something. Okay. The government was asking themselves what.
Oh, okay.
And what I said to them was that, well, I've done this, set up these new types of research centers that I described in Russia, with the help of MIT. So I said, I have this blueprint and I know how to do it. So if you guys are interested, we can take a look at doing something similar here. Yeah. And that way we can get it up and running a lot faster than having to spend a couple of years to figure out what to do. We can just take a copy, paste, and tweak. So it's not copy, paste, and run, because you have to tweak to the specific country. So the idea was copy, paste, and tweak this. So that's then the government said, and the industry said, because it was both, it said, that's interesting, let's try it.
Cool.
So that was the contribution.
Then? Yes, that sounds great, of course. What happened next?
So what happened next was that we had to figure out where to, the government, so industry was in and government was in, and the question to us to solve was, who should host this? And we explored a number of different venues. In Russia, we had to set it up at the university, and that was sort of the first place for us to look. Should it be at a university of some sort? And we had discussions with several, and it was, it's clearly the traditional way to do it. But then one of the things that came up was that one of the science parks here in Sweden stepped up and said, we could host it and be a neutral ground for it. And then we could collaborate with other science parks, and then we can kind of spread it across the country. And that way, the universities don't have to feel like they're competing for it. Because if you give it to one university, the other universities will think, well, that's their thing. We don't have one, and so forth. So by having it at the science parks, all universities can be members. Yes. and can contribute without having to feel that they're sort of one is better than the other or something. So we actually ended up then going with a science park, and that has really worked out well, I think.
And that was the Lindholmen Science Park in Gothenburg, right?
At the time, they were the one who stepped up because they were quite big and had experience with similar projects in the past. They have run and done. So there are some differences between how the science park work. And for several reasons, including the fact that they had a lot of experience and they were able to do it really quickly and so forth. They ended up picking up first, and then they have then sort of built a network of other science parks around Sweden where they can co-host this.
And I guess that was the early beginnings of AI Sweden, right?
That was the early beginning of AI Sweden, absolutely. So the government decision was in May 2018. And then there was a team working. And at that point, I was done with my project, and then we handed it over to Lindholmen too. So I went back into automotive industry as a research at Zenudi, or Zensact as it is today.
Yeah.
And then the people from Lindholmen set it up, opened it up in 2019, February, built it since. And then I thought it was really cool what they were doing. And they asked, we had some discussion. They said, could you come in and work on the data factory side and do something there? So I decided I took leave of absence at 90% and spent that time working with AI Sweden to help establish a really cool data factory.
Let's go into the data factory shortly, or in 2 seconds. But before that, do you have... AI Sweden set up with some government funding, and then they have partners, and you can become a partner of AI Sweden. But what's your best elevator pitch? What's your best reason for companies to say they should really join AI Sweden because of X, Y, and Z? What's your elevator pitch?
Sure. The way I look at it is that I can give you 3 different elevator pitches. It's a collection of the best practices I've seen anywhere in the world. And I've worked, as I said, at MIT. I worked in industry, leading companies. I worked in building this whole thing in Moscow. So everything I've learned in all these places, the best, sort of combined whatever I saw was best in this and try to put it here. And then some really smart people who are very well connected here in Sweden has made it even better by tweaking it and setting it up right. So so it's a very new way of doing it. So it's not something that we're used to in the past. So first of all, one had to understand that it's not something we've had. It's an innovation in itself. And we are hosted by the Science Park, and they're a non-profit organization, so they can't sell anything. They can't sell services or products or anything. They can host stuff, and they can host projects, and they can charge for use. So they can, if you want to be there, you have to help pay for the electricity.
If you rent some computing time or something.
Yeah, no, but we don't even rent out computing time because that would be competing with people who do that. So we can't rent out computers because then they have companies like AWS and Microsoft and others who actually do that commercially. So we don't do that. But the people can come and experiment, and we've gotten donation from these companies. So they've given us equipment so that people can practice. And the way I explain it is that you should think of, if you're a company, you should think of AI Sweden as a gym, an AI gym. So what you do, you buy a membership, a gym membership. Yeah. And if you have a gym membership, the only way to get strong is to get there and work out. So AI Sweden is open for all its partners to come there and work out and build your AI strength together with other companies. That was one of the things we started off by doing, based on what I've seen in the past, was that we didn't do an automotive center or a telecom center or a process center, but a place where all of these can come in together and learn. So we had healthcare early on working with object identification from automotive algorithms and saying, wow, you guys have this figured out. Well, we can actually use that straight away. And all of a sudden we had this knowledge transfer between the different people who came to the gym, if you will. Right. And we found out it's a lot more fun to go to the gym with some friends than coming by yourself, right? So you can learn from them. And we have a couple of what we call PTs, partner trainers. So
I love the
and to help people, and then we have the people who manufacture gym equipment, if you will. So hardware, software, frameworks, things like that.
Yeah.
They come in and they want to perfect their hardware infrastructure, and they get to work with companies who use it, and they both benefit from. And this was the way we set it up in Sweden, was to have the data factory and the algorithm researchers in the one place. That's our answer to how do you run faster to catch up on this exponential curve.
But you have algo researchers, as we call them, I guess AI or data scientists in some way.
Data,
yeah. But are they working at AI Sweden then, or are you more or less connecting universities or industries together?
We have both. We have a couple of own people who are there. For one of the things that happened was that European Space Agency identified one of the things we built in the data factory, the edge learning lab that we have, which is a unique lab that enables people to do all sort of cool experiments on how to train AI on the edge. So European Space Agency identified that as a key technology and said, we want to designate you guys as a FEE lab, which is a European leading lab on this technology. So we got that in the spring. Yes. And as a result of that, we have now a couple of senior researchers, postdoc level at least, from ESA working at us to explore our. And then we have other people from companies. We have several and even government agencies that move their people to us to be there and work and learn things and then go back. And then we have a couple of own people, the PTs, to train.
Yes. I'm just trying to figure out, the PTs, I think, is such an awesome term. And I love the analogy with gym and that you pay a membership and you start to work out and become more data and AI driven at some point in the future. But it's also these kind of limits where if you hire too many researchers, you more or less become a university also in some way, or if you hire people that do the work, for the company purposes, it's more consultancy. What do you think about this?
We're not a university because we don't give out degrees. So that's pretty clear. So we can't give out any academic degrees or any academic credits. So that's straightforward. That no, we can't do that. We can make it possible for people to learn at our place. And what we typically do is we set up networks so that people learn from each other. We have like deep dive for data scientists, for example, and that's data scientists from different companies learning from each other. How do you guys do it at Volvo? How do you guys do it at the let's say at one of the other companies that are members, or at the Västra Götalands region, or here in Stockholm at some of the companies so they sit together, they learn from each other. And that's a very effective way to do it, because many times the practicing engineers in the industry are quite far ahead of some of the research that's done right now. So that's something that the universities can't do. They don't have that right now anyway. But they could set it up, but they don't have the incentives and funding to do it, I think. So typically we try to navigate AI Sweden, at least the parts, for the most part, to find the niches. What are the big holes where we can make a difference?
Some like a gap analysis of what's missing today.
Yeah, more or less that. To complement it. It's no point. We cannot compete. We cannot charge for stuff. And if we were to compete with companies to make them go out of business, we're obviously not doing a good thing for the country. But if we can form something that inspires other people and say, well, we'd like to take that, fine, well, go ahead and take it. And then we'll move on to something different.
And of course, this sounds great. And I love that we are actually taking this initiative in Sweden. Just taking the side of a company then. And I'm thinking it could be a small startup, it could be a bigger incumbent, or some other enterprise that hasn't really made the digital journey yet, but are interested in getting started. But then if we think about the gym and we think about, you have these kind of co-working spaces, I guess also that you can come and actually sit down physically and meet people and talk to people and work together.
Yeah.
It's still a lot of time to invest for a company to say, now for 6 months or for X days in a week, a person, our very expensive employee, is going to spend time at some other organization. Wouldn't you think so? Or do you see some challenge with that?
For some companies, yes. And for other companies, no. We see both. We see some companies who have presence there pretty much all the time, and they benefit a lot from that. And we see other companies, we don't see much. They come instead to events.
Right.
They participate even sometimes in web events only. So it's all different by different companies. who they are, what they are, and how they want to use us. And it's kind of like a gym, right? It's, some people come often, some people come sometimes, some people just go there to get inspired and so forth. So you see all sorts, but what you see also happening is it crystallizes certain activities. And that is what I find exciting, is that we built this lab, as I described, this edge learning lab. And then a number of companies said, that's cool, it's a world-class lab. We have all sort of people coming to see it. Yeah. But how do we become world leaders?
Awesome. And should we go there perhaps?
We don't have to, but I mean, the point is that we try to adjust to the request we get. How do we help you guys to do something? And I find that really quite exciting, because I learned so much from the questions we get. Yeah. So we don't have to go into the details of it, but it's...
let's talk a bit more about the data factory, perhaps, at least.
Sure. Yep.
What is really the data factory at AI Sweden?
The original idea of it, which it is to create an AI, you need to have an algorithm and the purpose of that algorithm. And then you need to train that algorithm into a model of some sort. And the data factory is where you train that algorithm. So it's there are many ways you can find infrastructure to do it. There is commercially available on the web. You can go sign
public
up.
Public clouds or what?
Yeah, also of cloud-based services. You can do it. You can buy your own computer. If it's a small algorithm, and you can do it on a laptop, even, and everything in between.
Yes.
And what we said first when we started AI Sweden was that we probably have to buy a big cluster so that people can train. But then we had some really good donations in Sweden from some Wallenberg foundations and others. So we got some really, really good resources in place.
Like your DGX machine, right?
Yeah. So we said, well, let's, if we already have that, we should do something that's complementary. So let's not go there. So we said, we're not going to go and try to build just another big computer. So we said, well, let's see what can we do that's not there already. So we said, well, we need a small standard machine so that we can have master's thesis students and some visiting researchers doing some small stuff so that we have something. We can't really be a credible national AI resource if we don't have anything.
Or nor should you be a public cloud provider either, I guess.
No, yeah. And we don't do that. So it's just for partners who are doing some smaller things. So, master's thesis students and stuff like that. So then we said, what else do we do? So we said, let's set up a test bed. And then that means that our partners who want to do something, they can come here and they can contribute together. So that's how this Edge Learning Lab was done. Several companies said, we want to learn how to do this. And they said, we'll put some equipment in place and learn how to configure it, learn how it works, and what can be done with it. So we just enable them to put the stuff in there. And then once they put it in, then it's shared with all the partners. So any partner can come in and try that. And that's sort of how we do it. And now we're looking at that model to some others. We've had consulting companies in there. They've sold consulting services to some other company. They are members with us. They came in and they experimented within to see how it works, and then they take it back to their client and say, it works. Here's how we do it, and then they can go out and buy their own commercial solution for it.
So you can see it as a gym, as you say it, or like a sandbox environment, or something where you can experiment with techniques in different way, or learn how to. Yeah,
that's right. And then you have people working on the algorithms together with the hardware people, and that was one of the unique things we put up. Several countries have come over and looked at how we did it, and they are putting the same in place now.
So can you just give some examples? The data factory had some machines, it has some data set, I guess, and some people you can connect with it as well. So you can get started and start to work out, so to speak. You also have what's the Edge Lab then?
Well, we call it the Edge Learning Lab these days to not confuse it with other things. So what it was that in 2019 or so, we picked up in the automotive industry that federated learning was emerging as an interesting direction, let's say. Not many were doing it. There was a paper by Google back in 2016, I think, but it was starting to become a bit of a buzz, and people got interested, and we had some challenges. And it wasn't unique in the automotive, but if you think of a Tesla or something like that, they go around and take pictures in every direction, and if you break it, you'll transfer this to the US, and you have all sort of issues with GDPR and stuff like that. So we were starting to ask ourselves, well, can we just find another way to train other than just collecting massive amounts of data, shipping it to a data center somewhere, and China had put some blocks on exporting data from China, so we couldn't get data out of China and so forth. So what do we do? And then federated learning seemed to have some promise to solve this. And we said, but how do you do it? And how do we get something in place to test it? And then we talked to, from Zensact, we talked to Volvo Cars, who had the same interest. And then we talked to one of the really cool hardware providers at the time, and still, HP, who also were working with us closely. And we all had the same interest. They said, okay, well, let's do something. Let's build something. So we all put stuff in place and got it up and running really quickly. And then other people got interested and they put some stuff in there. And then from there on, it's just grown. And the idea is to come in and learn how to do it, learning how to train on the edge. And then, as I said, the European Space Agency found out about it and then figured that, if you can train in a satellite, you don't have to beam all the images down to Earth. You save a lot of bandwidth.
Right.
So that's, we have a really cool YouTube movie up that explains this at AI Sweden, so you can take a look at that if you want.
Yeah, perhaps, Goran, if you could try to find, what should you Google for? Some YouTube movie about...
You go on YouTube, AI Sweden and decentralized learning. If you go there, you can see, if you just go there, AI Sweden. Yeah, that would work. So that I should find it. Yeah, that first one there, yeah. We had this is the movie there, yeah. It has sound, yeah.
Awesome. I guess people can look that up.
Yeah, we had this movie done here about a month and a half ago because we had the Dutch king and queen and the Swedish king and queen came to the lab to see it.
Oh, really?
So we decided that this was the best way to explain it rather than somebody trying to, so visualizing it this way was actually quite effective.
Hospitals.
Yeah. Awesome.
There are 3 main reasons why we can't move or share data: regulations on data transfer or commercial confidentiality. Large volumes of data make transfer and storage costly and complicated. Opinions, activities, or other sensitive information can jeopardize people's privacy. Decentralized learning solves this. Now we can do things with AI that just weren't possible before, without compromising, sharing, or moving data. We move the AI to the data, train on different local data, bring back only the insights from training. Merge all the insights to form a better AI model and send that back out for further training. Cars can learn from each other and make traffic safer. AI and satellites can learn to better spot forest fires, flooding, or deforestation. Back at our hospital, better AI models can make better diagnoses and save lives. This is why we built the one-of-a-kind Edge Learning Lab here at AI Sweden, together with our partners. In this lab, we learn together and accelerate innovation by trying new ideas and developing techniques for decentralized learning.
Nice movie. I haven't seen that. It looks great.
It's good. Yeah, it works.
It's nice when the royal family comes and support with AI as well.
Yeah. That's
cool. I'd love to also speak a bit more about Zensact and Sinuity and the work you have been doing there. And of course, you're the head of the data factory now at AI Sweden as well, unless we mentioned that before. But before we leave AI Sweden, how do you see AI Sweden in 5 to 10 years? Do you have any, we know we will always change and adapt, as you say, but do you have any ideas or thoughts about, where AI will be in 5 to 10 years?
So AI Sweden, I think, is a catalyst of activities. So a lot of the things we do now might be taken over, as I said, by some consulting companies or by some universities or something, but we've got to sort of going quickly. That's sort of capture it here, get it off the ground, and then somebody who has the capacity and interest, if it works, take it and move on. So I see it evolving over time. If we were to become static and only do one thing, I'm afraid we would get pretty stuck and at some point become irrelevant. So I think it'll be, it's quite different today to what it was 3 years ago. Right. And I could not have predicted where we are today 3 years ago. Yeah.
Predicting things is hard, especially about the future, right? Yeah. Wasn't it Bill Gates that said that? Or
something along these lines, yeah. Okay. So all I can say is that it's probably going to be quite different, and a lot of the things that we are just doing here right now will probably have moved into other parts of the AI community somewhere.
So we can say, you basically do gap analysis, you find some gaps, you're starting to fill out some of these gaps, and they're starting to move out into the AI ecosystem, and then you try to continue to fill out the gaps in some way.
Yeah, actually, the gaps are found by our partners. They typically come to us and say, could you help us do this? And if we look around then and say, if nobody else is doing it, we'll say, yeah, we'll do it. and to get it going quickly. And if somebody else is doing it, then we will try to encourage them to work with that.
Awesome. Could we move to a bit to Zenseact as well? And
sure.
It's such a fun topic to speak more about all the things that you're doing there and self-driving cars and whatnot. But perhaps you can start by just giving a quick introduction to how did Zenseact get started? And perhaps you can choose the background of Zenuity or however it worked out.
Way back I suppose it was in 2016 or so, there was an emerging around the world, an emerging interest in self-driving cars, and there was a prediction that in 2021, a large proportion of the cars would be self-driving. So back to your point about it's hard to predict the future, right? So, but at the time, there were several big thinkers who were convinced that in 5 years it's going to be there. And similarly here, we had a couple of strong players in the automotive market. One was Autoliv, it was an automotive safety company, and the other one is Volvo Cars. And both of them saw this emerging technology and realized we had to be part of it. And the question was, should we fight for the resources in Sweden and try to, sort of divide the available workforce between us, or is there a way that we can do this smarter and sort of have some collaboration where we develop the fundamental technology and then we both take it to our products and implement it there? And the companies at that time decided that was a good way to go. And so they formed a joint venture called Zenuity, which started up, I think, in April 2017 or so, which had the task. It was 50-50 owned by Volvo Cars and Autoliv, with the task to develop the software solutions to make cars, essentially, or self or autonomous. And then, that was sort of the starting point of it. And then it evolved and it worked on that. And in I forget what year it was, but 2019 perhaps, I might be off by a year or so, Autoliv decided to split into passive safety and active safety. And so they split Autoliv into two companies. The passive safety portion was Autoliv, and the active safety was Veoneer. Was sort of a new company, and Zenuity remained with the Veoneer part. And Zenuity at this time had R&D centers in Michigan, in Germany, and in Sweden. And the development around Veoneer, they decided to focus, because they are tier 1 suppliers. They supply systems and solutions to other automotive.
Not only Volvo, but also other.
To a lot of the world markets. So they came from the passive safety, where they have seat belts and airbags and stuff like that. Plus they have active safety as well that they were supplying to a lot. So the active safety was supplied to a lot of the, and then they started to realize at that time that, the self-driving is probably further away than we thought in 2016. So they decided to adjust the strategy and focus more on ADAS systems, so drive support systems. So not full self-driving, but actually supporting. Yeah. And because that is something you could sell already and get that going. So they didn't. So there was a strategic split between the owners at the time where they had different interests, and at that time they decided also to split Zenuity accordingly. So the parts that were support of the company now went with Veoneer, and they were focusing more on the ADAS systems, whereas the part that remained with Volvo changed name to Zenseact and has then supported Volvo Cars in their forward strategy, both autonomous drive and ADAS drive support systems. Yep.
Drive support system. Cool. And you're mainly connected to Zenseact.
Zenseact, right? Only. Yeah. So once it was all the employees in Sweden ended up in Zenseact, and the employees in Germany, US ended up in the Veoneer.
I see. Cool. Can you give some more example? What are they more concretely doing at Zenseact now? Are they mainly a software provider, or are they also building hardware, or can you give some examples of what?
Sure. Zenseact is a software company, and they deliver software to OEMs, or to Volvo Cars here, specifically to both for their autonomous drive solutions that are being released coming up here. There was announcements made. I can't go outside what's in the in the press releases, but there were some press releases earlier in the year about releasing some autonomous solution for US market here in the reasonably near, or in the near future. And in addition to that, we're developing software for ADAS for also for Volvo cars. So
Sorry, for what? For
ADAS, which is drive support systems.
What do you call it? ADAS? Or
ADAS.
ADAS. Okay, cool.
So that's what you can find in many cars today, sort of drive support systems, the lane keeping and this, the dynamic distance keeping and dynamic speed keeping and so forth.
Interesting. And there was another company, I'm not sure, I don't recall the exact name of it, but it's been in a bit of a struggle for self-driving car companies. I'm not sure about Zenseact, I'm not sure they're doing well, but I know some other companies, and I don't recall exactly the name now, but they more or less either stopped working on self-driving cars or focusing on more passive assist or driver assist kind of functionality. Whereas, of course, Tesla and others are continuing on that path. What do you think the reason is? Is it basically that they came to the conclusion it's much more difficult than they thought in building more full self-driving functionality? Or?
Oh, yeah, I think that's sort of the main reason for all these people dropping out, that it's a lot harder. And I think one of the key things that what we could see in general, not for everybody, but a lot of these companies that started up was just thinking that when one of the hardest problem, there are several of them that are hard, but one of the hardest problem is to verify safety, functional safety. Is your solution safe or not? And there are a couple of different strategies you can choose to get there. And one of them was to do just immense amount of testing.
Right.
And a lot of companies, especially on the startups, were trying to go on the testing, test it, and so forth, so many miles and so forth. That probably isn't a good way to go forward with it. It's probably too hard to. So you have to have a different approach into that. So from the Volvo side, which has a very strong history of driver safety and so forth, we've sort of taken a different approach to that, and safety is without a doubt something that is part of the strong brand of Volvo. So we were sort of taking a lot of effort in there, and that's not an easy problem. And luckily we have many years of experience from Volvo cars in this area, so we can actually apply that in the development of this software. So that is one of the advantages of coming from within the automotive industry to be able to leverage that. So I think that's one of the key things you can see. You can also do Tesla has a different image. They are very they appeal to people who want technically cool things, and they have some tolerance for things that aren't working always. But I mean, obviously Tesla is an impressive car, no doubt, but there's some tolerance there for
They're
things.
more acceptant of bugs, and
it seems that way. So like if you had the number of accidents that you've seen with the Tesla on, let's say, on a Volvo, the Volvo owners probably have a different expectation or a different acceptance. You buy a Volvo to not have that, whereas Tesla can, and I'm speculating now, so I should be careful with that, but it appears to me that there's a different profile of buyers and a different acceptance as to what they want after the products. So and that might sort of also impact when the different car companies feel comfortable to delay. But I should certainly credit Tesla for doing some really cool, innovative stuff and coming out with things that many people, I think, wouldn't have thought of if it wasn't for what they do.
Yeah, if nothing else, just for electrifying, the whole market. Right?
Oh yeah, and the speed of things, and and they've done not only on electrifying, they've also done on casting, mega casting, and things like that. So they're inventing, inventing in all different areas. So it's a very cool company to see what they do.
And I guess similar to what we spoke of in the beginning, if we take academia versus industry, just taking one approach to improve our society can be dangerous. We need to have different approaches of doing so. So I guess Volvo is taking one approach and Zenseact another, and the Tesla is a third, etc. Will you agree? I mean, do they have a different way of approaching? I guess we still are all approaching full self-driving in some time in the future. Well,
you already have full self-driving. You already have full self-driving within certain envelopes, and it's. So that, I mean, Benz, for example, they've launched that in Germany already, have stuff on the roads. And it's kind of like with your kids. That's how I explain it, is that you don't one day give the kid a driver license and say, okay, you can drive anywhere you want. You do them step by step. When you feel comfortable that this kid is now ready to drive in the dark, fine, go in the dark. My kid is just now learning how to drive in snow, even though he had a driver license for a while. You know, the snowfall we saw here in Stockholm a week ago was, let's say, a good challenge, right?
A learning opportunity.
A learning opportunity, right? So you sort of open it up step by step, right? And that's the same, I think, approach that we do in the automotive. So that from that point of view, we are more talking about supervised and unsupervised driving. So we are, you know, in way back early days, they talked about these different levels.
You don't like that scale with 5 different levels?
It doesn't seem useful. So because what exactly does mean, it seems better to talk about this is supervised, which means that the driver supervises the system and the driver is responsible. And then you have unsupervised when the manufacturer is responsible. And the manufacturer can say, well, this is an unsupervised case that you can drive or scenario. So now we take the responsibility. And that could be daylight, let's say, daylight, highway, good weather, no ice. And then, but if you drive at night, you have to do the same thing, but then you have to be supervised. So then you have to drive, but you have a drive support system instead, because it perhaps isn't good enough yet with darkness or snow or something. But over time, it'll expand and expand and expand. So I think the levels.
And just for people listening that perhaps haven't heard about the levels, do you remember the levels there?
The level 0 is the driver does everything. The level 5 is that the car can do everything by itself.
You don't even need to have a wheel, I guess.
You don't need anything. You can go to bed in your car and it'll put you in the next city the next day. And then level 4 is also unsupervised, but it can't do everything. Level 3 has some less level. Level 2 is pretty much completely supervised, all of it. So then you do the driving with support and it goes down. So the definitions, I shouldn't quote them without seeing them exactly, but it's sort of a gliding scale from 0 to 5. But what it's missing is, what's really important is who is responsible. So that's supervised versus unsupervised, and what scenarios are you driving in?
So it's more like you have like level 5 driving, but only at certain points in time, or
within certain scenarios. Absolutely. So the level 5, but that's sort of the level 5 is like every scenario. That's the definition of level 5. So you can't say that you have level 5 at certain scenarios, because then it contradicts level 5, which is everything. So then it's some partial level 4, but then going to, so it seems more useful when we discuss.
I heard some person defining level 5 as no wheel. You have no mind or something, and for the other levels, but no wheel means that you can't even take control, even if you wanted to. And that's a different scenario, of course. Do you think there will, of course, we have cars that are level 5 in some cities. I think San Francisco has some, and Google have their Waymo solution, at least with some robot taxis available, and I think China has as well. I think it doesn't even Russia have also some self.
Oh yeah, it was done by Yandex in Russia. So, but it's very limited, and it's something that they don't really release. It's demo cars. And they had some at the university in where I was in Moscow, and they also had one at Innopolis in Kazan. They had some that was just running around there. We've seen stuff like that here in Sweden too, where you have some.
We have the buses.
Small buses that go slowly around. But these cars were going actually a little bit faster than that. So they were within a more or less fenced off area, more or less. There are walkers around there, but it's not out in city traffic. So, but Yandex did some interesting demos with demo cars. That's published on YouTube, but that's been done by others too, where they have them drive around with a safety driver, and we can do that too here when we have that. But it's not something.
We like in Volvo, you mean?
In Sweden. Yeah.
So how do you see the future? Do you think there will be a point in time in 5-10 years or whatever time scale you choose where the normality will be that the car that you buy, if you buy a new one, is to drive it in unsupervised mode, so to speak?
I think so. I mean, it's already coming. So it's step by step. It's just like your kid. It's gonna over time. I mean, it takes you 18 years to get a kid who can drive. So it should probably take 18 years before you have a car who's fully self-driving too, is my guess, from the time we started. So yeah, in some future, not 18 years, because we've already been at it for some period. So, step by step, we're now starting to release certain things, and then other companies, car companies, Tesla and Benz and others, they have some stuff out there already. Volvo's coming out as they published So it's step by step coming. And will it be fully self-driving in every condition, every country, every time of the day, probably not.
Yeah.
There's going to be certain cases where it doesn't really know what to do. So it's going to just stop and say, if you want to go further from here, you're going to have to drive yourself. So.
Yeah. I see the time is flying away here, so I'm trying to find, what we're trying to move a bit more into more societal kind of philosophical questions here. So in that spirit, and thinking that we will have full self-driving cars not too far in the future, at least, do you think that will be a beneficial thing for society?
Absolutely. I think that, and to a large extent, it'll help us to utilize the infrastructure better. It'll increase mobility for people who have some kind of impairment, visual impairment, disability of sorts. It will make it safer once we have good grip on this technology.
Yeah.
I mean, the car doesn't get tired. It doesn't read its cell phone while it's driving and things like that I've seen people do around and so forth. So I think overall it'll follow the traffic rules and so forth. So overall, yes, I think it'll be an improvement.
Yes, agreed. And thinking then you need to build in more and more of regulation is one part, of course. I think that's the easy part. Perhaps the more challenging parts are more ethical and the classical, like trolley example, if you remember that one. And perhaps we can take another more simplified example then. If you want to have an AI system, like a full self-driving car, to have a better sense of morality. And some people call this also the AI alignment problem, in having AI system doing things that are aligned with our moral values that we have as humans. What is the best way to do that? I guess one way would be that you simply program a computer and add the rules that we think is the best ones, or we could also take a more data-driven approach. How do you think we could have morally acceptable full self-driving cars or AI systems in general going forward?
It's a good question. It's always discussed when we are talking to people, and it's really good. It's interesting. So if you do, you were right on it, Anders, here about how to think about it. You can either sort of do a rule-based system and say if this then that.
Yes.
That's sort of almost like control theory. You don't need AI to do that, because the AI will tell you the situation. Perhaps it'll analyze it for you, say here's what the situation is, then you move into your rule-based system and it decides what you can program that. Yeah. Now the way we train, we don't do that in the way we develop right now. We developed essentially the car is just the same as you train your kid. Like, don't drive anywhere where you can't stop. If something is behind the corner, you should be able to avoid any kind of scenario that comes up. So because you don't train your kid, like when you're driving in Sweden, follow the moral values here. When driving in some other country, follow the moral values there. Yeah. And that's so we do the same. So that question is rather hypothetical when it comes to cars. It's an interesting one, but it's not something that we ever do because we don't train it that way at all. It was a really interesting, and here I would recommend you guys who are listening to go on this. It's something called Moral Machine. Okay. So if you bring that up, if you go
Moral Machine,
Moral Machine, and then MIT. Yeah, there you have it. That one there. That is super interesting. Play with this and see what you come up with. And then there was a paper published based on this, and the outcome was that you can set this up and you can try you can set up all these different scenarios. And the researchers who did this, they found that the answer isn't the same in every culture. So the let's say the morale, whatever you want, the norms, the culture. Yeah. Really impacts how people want their cars to drive. So in some countries, if you have a rule-based system, which we don't have, but if you were to have such a system, in some countries you would want it to act in one way, and in other countries you would want to make a different decision. So this one here is really quite a cool thing to play around with and see what you can come up with. And then, as I said, they published a paper on this one, and you play with this and see. That's.
I think actually now that you show it, I've seen it, but. I wasn't it some conclusion about elderly people or not?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You have elderly, you have cats and dogs, and I know for sure which one I would go for, whereas cats and dogs, no doubt. But and somebody else would go for the other animal. I should not tell you which. My family and relatives know which one I would go for, but
it's a sensitive topic for sure.
Oh yeah, so some people would agree with me, some people will not agree with me, and I think that's the point, with this one here, is that depending on your culture, your background, you would pick elderly people versus babies, or sick people versus healthy people, many people versus few people, yourself versus somebody else. Yes. And you get to try all these things here. So it's you can use this to explore.
I love it. We have to play with this later, I think.
It's already playing.
Okay, so just continuing this discussion a bit more. We need to have more and more advanced AI systems if we quote Elon Musk on this, he says that he's building not human level AI.
The baby or the nurse?
Oh, that's a tough one.
A cat or a nurse, right?
Yeah, no, but on the left. Oh, it's a cat.
It's a cat, yeah.
Okay.
Then it was easy. So.
Yeah. Okay. So we can think about different ways to build up the AI systems of the future. Of course, rule-based is one. Other people speak about symbolic AI. Other speaks about connectionists or neural network AI built by data instead. We can also speak about this kind of human-level AI, that is some kind of AI that reach the level of intelligence that humans potentially have. And then you can speak about artificial general intelligence. I think Elon, he says real-world AI, which I think is an interesting take on it, which also speaks about it should be an AI that can work in the current world that we have in some way. Not saying specifically that it should mimic the humans, but necessarily it should work in the real life instead. Goran is just playing with this all the time. Anyway.
Obviously, I'm very bad in this. So.
Do you have... If we were to start with the question like symbolic AI versus neural network built AI systems, do you have any thoughts about pros and cons with those? Or is that...
I think it's application based. So I'm not sure if you can make a general statement that one is always better than the other. So I haven't thought through that, and I haven't experimented on it. So it becomes very intuitive. So I almost have to give a political answer on this one. Depends.
Yeah, I think it's a good answer. And there is so many different definitions of symbolic AI as well.
Yeah.
That it's really hard to make a clear definition of what it really is. Thinking, Jan LeCun has his view on it, and Gary Marcus and others have their other view. And some people speak about hybrid systems that have both, rule-based and neural network-based components in them. And I think, obviously, I think you're right. It depends, and I think we need to have both. And I think any AI system that actually used today have both data-driven and rule-based components in them already.
Well, our course is one example of that.
Yeah.
But not for this particular problem.
So just I'm thinking, another argument that would be, let me make a statement and see if you agree with it or not. So we can choose to guide research in AI in different ways, and we can choose to make it, as I think we have to a large extent in the past, be inspired by how the human mind works. And then you can start to reach more and more higher level of human intelligence in AI system. Another way to guide research would be to say that, okay, AI and machines are different than humans, and they certainly are today, without a question. And then perhaps we should try to build on strengths that the machine have, and let humans do what they are good at, and let machines do what they are good at. And then potentially that means that we should not guide AI research in the direction of simply mimicking the human mind, but instead let's use and build AI systems for what machines can do well. You see what I mean here? And do you have any thoughts on this? How to guide the future of AI research?
Yeah,
small questions here.
No, it's a small question. I saw some YouTube clip of the founder of Alibaba some years ago.
Jack Ma.
Yeah, Jack Ma, exactly. He was addressing that particular question. Exactly that question. Okay. And I thought he was pretty much onto something. He said that computers are really good at some things.
Yes.
And crunching a bunch of numbers and solving some equations and all this stuff. And that computers are always going to be better than we are.
Yeah.
And humans are always going to be better at creativity, taking care of other humans, and sort of more well, how would they express it? More cultural type things. So we should find ways to use the computer for these things. And it was actually quite a good talk. So if somebody looks him up, Jack Ma and role of computers or something. So I thought he was quite good. And when I looked at some of this, after I've seen that, it was probably 5 years ago, I came into the store, the grocery store, and they've replaced now many of the cashiers with self-scanning and checkouts. And I realized that many lone people, especially old people who might have a spouse who passed away or something, the only contact they had with another human is when they go to the store, and then many of them would go every day just to buy a package of something, bread or milk or something. Just they could buy it all in one day and go to the store once a week. But they would go every day just to buy something, to just talk to somebody. So they would tell them, here's the price. Yeah, exactly. Now they took it away, and it's just you go blip it, and so you lose that. And of course the scanner is much better than the cashier because it never punches something wrong. Yeah. But you miss that human part. So, and then the stores, I think, are missing the thing that instead, what do they do with the cash register person, the cashier? Well, they fire them, save some money. But instead, what they could do is set up like book clubs or some knitting clubs. I saw that this year. The Christmas present of the year here in Sweden is home knitted stuff.
Yeah, right.
So they could set up knitting clubs and things like that, where the people who used to work in the cash register could now, have that social interaction with the customers, and that I think would be an attraction for them to come, and then they can go and scan their stuff if they want to. But here is sort of a division that now we freed up the time for the cash register who were just doing some mundane, rather, just punching numbers, and now they can actually start taking care of people. But do we use that opportunity? Yeah. That's, I think, the way to think about it.
But I guess if we choose to believe in a positive future where we can at least have machines that take away some of the more boring and tasks that are not well suited for humans, perhaps like filling out horribly complicated administrative forms, for nurses that need to fill out the journal systems, and it's so complicated, so they can't even, they spend 50% perhaps on administrative tasks instead of social interactions, which they really should perhaps spend more time with. Do you think that will be the type of future? If we take medical use cases, for example, that it will enable nurses or medical doctors to focus more on the social interactions, and in that way lead to a much better healthcare system than we have today?
I think so. I mean, the potential is clearly there. The question is, are we ready to pay for it, or are we just going to cash in on the savings?
Right.
So it comes back to us, and as taxpayer or as an insurance buyer, will you? Who wants? Where do you want to spend that saved money or the saved thing? Do you want? I would argue that having that human interaction is absolutely the way to go. Yeah. Where some others might argue a different way. There's a choice there, and somebody has to make that choice. That's, I suppose, our politicians.
I mean, it's well put, I think. And I guess the danger, as you said now a few times, is that if we choose to simply remove the human tasks of yesterday and not transform their tasks into more like human or social interactions, but simply try to reduce the cost, and that will actually lead to a decrease in societal impact potentially. But if we instead choose to let humans do what they're good at, but actually pay the money for them to actually do have the time to perform the social interactions, then it could be a better future. Is that the right way to frame it? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I think that when I was doing some presentations some years ago, you probably heard that. I'm going to come to the conclusion on this one. That people were talking about the fourth industrial revolution. Yeah. And I disagreed with that. I thought this is the second industrial revolution. Because a revolution is when you do something completely different. Then you have a bunch of evolutions on it. So the first industrial revolution was when you replaced muscles with machines.
Yes.
And then we've seen a bunch of evolution on that, but it's still the same. Yeah. The second revolution, which is what we're seeing now, is when you're replacing the brain with a machine.
Right.
And if you look back at the time when machines started to replace muscle, all of a sudden, at that time, if we were all alive at that time, we would all be out in the field. Actually, now we would not be in the field anymore because we just done all the harvest and stuff. But pretty much the whole year we're out in the field doing stuff. But now we don't have to. So now we see the emergence of new jobs that never existed back then to just maintain our muscles. You see people who start up gyms, and you see personal trainers and things like that. It was not all that necessary back then, and we couldn't afford it. Now, the same now, we are now replacing brains with machines. So the people who use their brains to do simple tasks are now available to do other things. And the question is, what new things will we invent with the capacity that we are now coming in with? And I think that's sort of what's exciting. So there's a lot of opportunity here that we could take.
I love the way you phrased it. There is this book called The Prediction Machines from AIAW, and he says it in very similar terms as you just did, which is that if you have a proper disruption, he uses a term instead of revolution, but disruption I think he defined as it's when the cost of something drastically drops. So if we took when the transistor was created, or all the computers were created in the 1950s and 60s and forward, it led to a drastic drop in cost of calculus or arithmetic calculations simply. And that completely removed the job of being, I think even a human that did calculation before was called a computer. That was a human.
Absolutely. I mean, there are some famous movies about the computers at NASA, the latest there who did all the calculations for the space, the moon mission. So yeah, absolutely. The computer was a person computing.
So, I mean, he said basically exactly the same terms as you did. It's basically that these disruptions or proper revolutions basically create new jobs that we've never seen before. And what they will be, I guess it's hard to tell. But potentially it will be a world of, if I throw in another Elon Musk quote, I do that far too often, but why not? He says the future will be a world of abundance, meaning that it will be a world where we have, more energy that we can use or need. We will have, all the no economic gain or want that we perhaps have today. And we can choose to do nothing if we so wanted. We can still have roof on top of our head and live some kind of life at least. But there will be an abundance, and that will lead to other kind of challenges perhaps. Do you believe that's the future we will have?
Perhaps. It's hard to. I have to think through that for a second, but it's a nice visionary picture, right? And then the question is, what is the? There's nothing really contradicting any of it. The question is just how far away into the future is that? I think so. The abundance of energy, in some ways, of course, today with the energy situation we are in, seems quite far away, right? Yes, but on the other hand, being an optimistic person, I have a feeling that humans are pretty ingenious, so we'll come up with solutions.
AI will help create the fusion energy.
But the other thing that I see also with anything we do is, so if you compare, say, energy to time, people are, if I give you a lot of time, well, you somehow seem to always fill that time with stuff.
Parkinson's law, right?
Something along this line, right? So I have a feeling that the energy is the same. So the energy abundance, I think, is just going to be very temporary before people feel it. And if you build a new road, and saying we have been so much traffic congestion, so let's build a new road here, and then for 2 weeks it's no congestion, but then people figure out, wow, there's a new road, I can take the car today.
Yeah.
And then you have the same congestion again. So I have a feeling that the energy abundance will be a temporary phenomenon, and then people start to.
Could very well be so. Yeah. Well said. I remember once, I think, I heard you at some point in the future say something about Sweden as a country. And I was really impressed with that. I think in short, you spoke a bit about the Swedish industry, and that a lot of people don't realize how powerful and how good country Sweden is. Do you remember what I'm trying to refer to?
Oh, no doubt. I have this pet peeve here. I hear people sometimes stand up in presentations and other things and say, well, start the presentation with Sweden is a small country. And that always triggers me. It turns out that the Swedish space strategy some years ago started with these 5 words: Sweden is a small country. And it's like, boom. So to me, Sweden is not a small country. You can take any objective metric you want, and actually it turns out that Sweden is not small. But what Sweden is really strong at is really a superpower is the breadth of the industry sectors here. We have pretty much everything. You have famous telecom companies. We have aerospace, military aircraft companies made here. We have automotive. We make trucks, ships, and then all the way into companies like where you've been active here, Anders, in Peltarium. We have also some very innovative banks.
Right.
Plus we have the whole mining sector. We have the whole paper sector, forest sector. We have the energy sector. We have automation companies like ABB. We have, and then you go into consumer products like the H&M. We have IKEA, and then you can move into other sectors as well here. And the fact is that we have it all in one small, relatively small. If you compare to the US, within a single state, there's not many states that can match that. Whereas the US obviously have all these things, right? Yeah. But in a single state, the closer you can get is California. I think they have a lot of this, but not all. They don't have a very strong paper industry as far as I know, and process industry. Well, they have some process industry, that's true, they do, but they don't have a number of the things that we do. So it's a unique place to set up test facilities and set up this cross learning.
Right.
And one of the things we really should continue to develop here in Sweden is the ability for the companies to learn across fields and to invite foreign companies to come here and try their infrastructure, because they can try it on automotive, on aerospace, on healthcare. We actually have pharmaceuticals here. We have AstraZeneca, who is a very strong leader in that area. So that is and that's one of the reasons I'm working here, because you have everything. You get to talk to company leaders from all these different things and this constant learning. And that is really cool.
I think it's really well said. And the breadth of all the industrial sectors that we have in Sweden is very impressive, right?
Nobody can match it that I know of. I'll put the challenge out there and see if somebody can come back with that. But as far as I can tell, no other country, I mean, if you count US as a country, sure. But if you go to a specific state, then they can't.
Awesome. I was hoping that we would have time to go into regulation, etc. But I think we ran out of time to do that, and it's not the most fun topic anyway. So I think we'll skip that, and but simply move on to. I think we cover the most important topics here. We have so many other questions that we could have covered, but I think in interest of moving also into the after work, let me simply ask you this, Mats. What's next in your life? What's happening coming weeks, months, professionally, privately, for you?
Well, privately we're going towards Christmas, right? So, yes. So taking a few weeks off there to spend time with family here in Sweden is what I'm looking forward to there. Yes. Professionally, I look forward to working with the two teams I'm affiliated with, both Zensact and AI Sweden, and helping my colleagues and the companies, the organizations there to compete well in the areas they are at, because I do love competing. It's and the cool thing is that they're both competing in completely different and complementary ways. They're competing to each other, but AI Sweden is obviously competing for talent and helping to position Sweden as a leader in AI, and that's a really cool race to be in. And Zensact is competing in its automotive niche with autonomous drive, and I have the passion for making the colleagues there successful, and that's, I suppose, my academic background. I like being, teaching in some ways, creating opportunities, but also, given the background I have of setting up systems, I'd like to create these teams and see if we can
to build that, to accelerate the use of AI in Sweden as well. In different ways. Cool. Anyone that you would recommend to come to this podcast? Someone that you would like to listen to?
I've maybe that could also solve the problem we had on the regulation. Why don't you think about taking a politician here? And see what they are. There is one or two Swedish politicians at the EU.
So we have tried with some, but we got a very quick response back. It was not the positive though. So I hope that somebody can actually.
Well, you can. We've had a lot of politicians, especially international politicians, come to AI Sweden. So you could ask one of the international politicians. Right. If the Swedish ones don't want to come, there's always the international ones. They might want to do it.
Yeah, we would love this. Yeah.
So you can explore that, and that should be a possibility.
Sounds perfect. Thank you very much, Mats. It's been a pleasure to have you here, and let's continue with the after work as well.
Well, thanks so much, Anders and Goran. It's great to join your podcast, and I look forward to listening to continued and also getting some feedback on who can beat Sweden in the breadth of industry.
Right.
I'm
That's right.
looking for the answer for that one.
We'll keep you up to date on that.
Thanks.
Thank you.